And now we are joined by Dr. Donald Jensen, Associate Fellow at the GINO Germani Institute and Adjunct Professor at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Is it Dr. Jensen or Jensen?
It depends on what country you're in. I'm Danish American.
We'll go with Jensen, shall we, for now?
That's fine with me.
Now, Russia's test of a nuclear-powered missile feels a little bit like Cold War déjà vu. What do you think the messages that Moscow is trying to send here?
Well, the bottom line on all of this, and you summarized it quite accurately, is that Russia is on the back foot. Putin is taking both diplomatic and military setbacks on the ground, and he has responded by, as you say, reinvoking the ghosts of the Cold War and bringing up this, testing this Burevestnik cruise missile today is a good example. There have been many others the past week or two where Putin rattles the nuclear saber to show that Russia is still a great power, despite its disappointments in recent weeks that Russia can strike the West and other countries. The problem is that that's not entirely convincing because no weapon is, in the case of the cruise missile you mentioned, no weapon is invincible. That missile has failed 17 out of its 20 tests, including the one today, and that missile is run by nuclear power, which is going to spray nuclear radiation all over wherever it travels. And someone called it a flying Chernobyl. So Putin can say all he wants, but the fact is that all of these things that you talked about reflect that Russia is on the back foot. Putin is not happy, clearly, and he's responding by attacking Ukrainian civilians, by threatening nuclear weaponry that he says is going to work well, and all the other things you mentioned. And the fact of the matter is that his room for maneuver, especially after Trump increased the sanctions this week, is diminished somewhat, and he's nervous. He's nervous, very clearly.
Yeah, I mean, you say that Putin will say the Burevestnik will work well. Some experts doubt the strategic utility of it and suggest it's more political theater. What do you think?
I think that's quite true. I go with what you say. It's political theater. This is a weapon which has not worked most of its tests. Yeah, Putin claims it's invincible, but there's nothing invincible. And as Putin said today in the press, the virtue of the Burevestnik is supposed to be that it can fly anywhere for a long time, but it goes lower than the speed of sound, and that means that when you fly all over the place less than hypersonic or less than supersonic, it can be shot down. No weapon is invincible. I think Putin knows that. Certainly Gerasimov, the chief of staff, knows that as well. If I could add one little fact here, one of the troubling things is that sometimes you wonder if Putin is getting the right information. Gerasimov, the chief of staff, bragged in the Russian press about how the Russian troops are surrounding Ukrainian forces in the town of Pokrovsk, and that's simply not true by Western standards. In fact, the opposite is true, which is that Russian troops are surrounded in that particular town, and Putin has taken 14 months to try to get it. He still doesn't control the whole town, yet he demands the rest of Donbass and Lugansk in eastern Ukraine. He demands it as part of his negotiating position, but who's going to give him something he doesn't even control, nor is close to controlling? And that's simply a ridiculous assertion.
Yes, and telling Putin news he doesn't want to hear can be a very dangerous role, I think. Trump cancelled his meeting with Putin, saying he won't waste time without a viable peace plan. How do you see how things are between Trump and Putin at the moment?
Well, I can't speak to their personal friendship, but let's go right to the facts as we see them, which is to say, Trump has obviously zigzagged over this first year of his administration about Russia, but I think I take him at his word that he expected the Russians, as they talked about 2 weeks ago, to come to the table with serious willingness to compromise, and that begins with a ceasefire and troops frozen in place. And of course, if you have a ceasefire with troops where they are right now, Putin falls automatically short of his war goals. So Putin did not want to talk about it. Maybe they'll do it later. Maybe they will do it sooner, maybe later. But either way, Putin is not getting what he wants in the negotiating table. If I could add a couple more points here, one of which is that I think he hopes that Trump will reverse course again, first of all. Second, I hope that he tries still, I think, to separate Trump from the European partners. And the European partners and the U.S. president have recently, certainly in the last month or two, worked together very well. But you mentioned correctly that let's call it Putin's money guy, Kirill Dmitriev, who's a special envoy for the Kremlin, is in the U.S. this week. He very much is. And so even as Putin threatens war, Putin also wants to make land deals, has Dmitriev here talking to various U.S. businesses and companies and administration officials in the hope that he can get Trump to pack back another direction and talk about a deal with commercial opportunities attached to that deal. That's what Putin is having to do, and it's going in different directions at once, partly because he's trying to explore all possibilities to get what he wants. Putin sees negotiations as a means to get victory. It's not. Putin doesn't believe in win-win. Putin believes in they win and the West loses. Or if both sides lose, he wants to make sure that the U.S., especially Europe, and above all Ukraine, lose more than the Russians do. So we're a long way from a peace deal here. But without playing ball with what Trump wants, Putin is put in a corner now, waiting to see if Trump will impose. He has imposed sanctions, but Trump could do other things as well, one of which would be to upgrade the Ukraine military capabilities by giving them the Tomahawk missiles that Zelensky has talked about so much in the past 2 weeks.
Now, you mentioned there the Trump administration working very well with Europe the last few months. This must be quite annoying to President Putin, who was very much hoping to drive a wedge between the United States and Europe.
Absolutely. Excellent question. Yes, it infuriates them because he had thought a year ago, let's say 9 months ago, that Trump would be much more sympathetic to Russia's demands. And indeed, a few people, by their public statements in the administration, appear to be that. But that's not the U.S. position. The U.S. position is what Trump decides, and Trump is giving, increasing the sanctions. Trump has approved that deal where we sell weaponry to NATO, who then gives it to Israel, sells it to Israel. This is a big difference from, say, February, when you all remember that horrible public event in the White House where the Vice President Trump got after Zelensky for what he was wearing. You probably remember that. Things
Indeed.
have gone a long way. Things have come a long way in this short period of time, and that long way has been away from the Kremlin position. So Putin is now having to reassess how he approaches the Ukraine problem, the war, because Putin is not budged at all from his initial war demands of February 2022. He wants Ukraine to be subservient to Moscow, and one way to do that, he thinks, is to increase the attacks on Eastern Europe. The threats, the overflights, the Baltic, the Shadow Fleet in the Baltic Sea, which illegally transports Russian energy to customers under shadowy licensed ships. All of that are attempts for him to get around what seems to be, at the moment, it could change, but at the moment at least, the momentum going against what he wants. If I could add one more point, the Gaza peace deal, again, pushes Russia out of a region where it was a major player until relatively recently. President Trump's deal is a deal. Trump likes deals. He likes deals when the U.S. comes out well. He supports, per the agreement, the right of the Palestinians to develop their own state, the right of both sides to try to work together. And this has really been disappointing for Putin because Russia now is trying to beg the Syrians to come back to their ports. Russia is now embracing Iran more tightly when, in fact, Iran is weaker than it has been in many years. And Trump is now dealing with the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states, in a very constructive way, and that's one of the reasons why the deal, at least on paper so far, has been achieved.
Let's talk about sanctions for a moment. These new sanctions from the EU and potential sanctions from the United States as well. Russia, the Kremlin, is saying these don't really affect us, and they're going to hurt Europe more than they hurt Russia. Do you think that's true?
It's not true at all. Russia has coped with sanctions largely by seeking markets like China and India that would buy Russian oil, illegally or legally. That's a separate discussion. And as you probably know, India was a not primary importer of Russian oil before the war, and now they are. And Trump has leaned on Modi heavily. Come to an understanding that they cannot continue to buy Russian oil as they have since the war began. I think Modi gets the message. But what you see this week, and it's a very important development, is that Trump has sanctioned Russian companies for the first time in this administration. Rosneft and Lukoil are major Russian producers and exporters of oil. Previously, previous to these sanctions announced this week, the United States has squeezed China and India much more. But now Trump has gone back to making Russia itself and these companies and their subsidiaries a major target. This means the 30 or so companies that are subsidiaries, banks who deal with Lukoil, banks who deal with Rosneft, these are now subject to sanctions. And as you see, since the middle of the week, the flow of money has changed significantly because a lot of Chinese banks, a lot of Indian banks don't want to get slapped with sanctions by the U.S. Well, even though they have gotten away with it, that is to say, subsidizing the Russian oil and energy industry for the past couple of years. So now Putin has this worry to deal with as well. Now, I'm sure they're going to continue to cheat. I'm sure they're going to continue to use shadow fleets to transport Russia under the table, let's call it, to transport Russian energy to various customers outside the Russian Federation. But it's going to be much harder now, and Trump and the Europeans can go further. And the UK, as you probably saw, the EU this week, all of whom have gotten much more detailed and cracking down and trying to get these other companies, let's call them indirect violators of the sanctions policy, to back off from supporting the Russian war effort.
Okay. We've got less than a minute left. Let me just ask you this, if you can, briefly. What are the prospects then for any peace initiative in the coming months?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I think we're going to see this war go into 2026. Both sides are suffering mightily. Russia has lost more than 1 million people. The Ukrainians also have suffered heavily. You see Russia bombing Ukrainian hospitals and children's hospitals and apartment buildings. This is going to go on through the cold winter with an outcome yet to be determined. And as President Trump said, for him and for Zelensky, the first step would be a ceasefire. And they sit at the table and talk about where all of this horrible violence is going.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Donald Jensen in America, Jensen in Europe. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. It's very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.